Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today we are taking a look at the roster for the Florida Mayhem. They finished last season as a team fighting for a play-in spot. Of course, making it through with a pretty dominant run in that play-ins. I don't even think they dropped a map, if I remember correctly. Very, very good run from them in the play-ins. Finishing 7th overall in the Western region, 12-12 record, +1 differential, so pretty much a 500 team, all things considered. It was an okay run from them, but they did not do much in terms of making waves when it came playoff time. They didn't find tons of success in any of the tournaments. They were a pretty average run-of-the-mill team last year, but they look going into this season to be kind of building upon what they did last year and trying to find more success from what was last year a relatively successful rebuild after, of course, their 2020 and 2021 squad had some good ups, but some unfortunately pretty low lows that really kind of hurt the team in the long run. So taking a look at this team, you can see it here. They have Checkmate, Someone, RuPaul, those three all returning from last season. They were all on the roster for the 2022 season, and they added Merit, Sauna, and Chorong as the other players rounding out this roster. It's a 6-man roster. I'm going to say I don't expect them to make any more changes, though it is certainly possible that they make some more changes, but I'm not going to assume that they make any more until, unless we start to see kind of reason why they might, but that's what this roster is right now, so let's jump in and let's talk about what they have done on this roster. And we're going to start with Someone, the tank player on this roster. He is the only tank on this roster, and relatively speaking, he is a very good tank player. He solo tanks for the team the majority of last season. I don't even think they put anybody else in on the role, though, of course, the beginning of the season, Adam was also on this roster, but Someone was their tank player last year. He was arguably the best rookie tank player last year outside of Reiner. Very, very good year from Someone. He was one of the most successful teams with like the solo tank. He was one of the only players that really succeeded at that across the league. And so he's a pretty flexible player. We've seen him play successfully a number of roles, but a lot of his kind of big moments on the season were on the Reinhardt. He played a very good Winston. His Junker Queen was pretty solid. He's a decently flexible tank. I personally don't love solo tanking, but this team went with it last year and found pretty good success, so I'm willing to give this one a pass because I think considering how well he did last year, and you give him another season to really kind of get to figure out some of his best heroes and kind of figure out how to make some of the heroes work, I think this team should all around be better. I think there was an interview that Hawk did with Yiska that was very interesting, and he basically said one of the things you can look at with a lot of teams is you can try to have a game where like two off-tank players who are off-rolling playing against each other can match up, and it's usually fine. But when you have teams like Boston and San Francisco picking up specialists for certain tank heroes, you really do need to consider picking up other tanks to kind of fill some of that role. So we'll see if Florida does that. I don't think they will. I think Someone is a very important player to this team. I think the way he plays is very important to this team. He's kind of the lifeblood of this team. He really is kind of the heart and soul for this team. And so I think, generally speaking, we're going to be seeing a lot of just Someone. I really don't think they're going to pick anybody else up. But there's definitely the potential if they find themselves in a very, very, very strong off-tank meta and Someone is just not able to really pick up the role the way that they want. Definitely in that type of situation, I could see them looking to bring someone else in to kind of bolster that tank line. But all in all, Someone's a very, very good tank, and I expect him to have another really good year in 2023. Moving on to talk about the support line for this team. This is one of the more interesting parts of this roster. Like I said before, RuPaul returning to this team. Very, very, very good flex support for this team last year. They picked him up in the middle of the year to kind of deal with Kariv moving over to a coaching role, and also to kind of be there. And a lot of the time, he honestly did kind of bench Sir Majed, who I thought Sir Majed mechanically very, very good. I thought he had some times last year where he made some kind of poor positioning choices and kind of got himself out of position. I think RuPaul didn't make those same mistakes. I think he's a very solid player, knows how to play the role very well, and doesn't normally kind of caught out and make a lot of those positioning mistakes. So even if his mechanics maybe aren't the level of Sturmajed's, I think his overall play was always improved by the fact that he was very, very smart in the way he played. So very, very good player. And you pair him with Chorong, who, of course, last year was the main support player for the Toronto Defiant. Now he is here on the Florida Mayhem. I think it's a very interesting support line. I'm surprised that they only have 2 players, if I'm being completely honest with you, for a number of reasons, and a reason we'll get more into when we start talking about the DPS and kind of the overall look for this team. In general, I think it's a very, very, very talented roster, and I think these 2 players are both very, very good. And I think that you are getting very high-level play in terms of mechanics and positioning and just game sense out of the support line. I don't think it's among the best in the league. There are some really good support lines right now. I've said it before, and I'll beat the same drum over and over. Houston, San Francisco, Boston, those are some Atlanta. Those are some really, really good support lines. I don't think this support line is at that level, but this to me gets you into a similar level. I'd also argue the Gladiators might be in that top tier as well. I do like a lot of what they have. But if not, I would argue this is kind of that second tier of support lines with the likes of, well, formerly Dallas, but they're in Korea now, so it doesn't really matter as much. But I like what they have. I like what Atlanta has. Like I said, I like what the Gladiators have. So there's a tier of supports. I like Vancouver's quite a bit as well. So there is I would say Florida's probably better than Vancouver. Florida's probably similar to to Toronto, and in that kind of level of support line where I think it's good. I really like the talent. I don't know how well they will play together, but RuPaul played very well with Animo last year, so I do have faith that Chorong, who I think right now is at a better point in his career than Animo, I do think this is an overall upgrade in the support position because I really like Chorong as a player. I thought he had a good year last year. I think Toronto had some issues last year. I don't think Twilight and Chorong were that problem. And so to me, Chorong comes into a roster where I think there is just more talent around him. And I think he's going to be a very, very, very good partner to have with RuPaul. I don't necessarily think RuPaul is the level of Twilight, but I do think RuPaul is still a very good player and someone who I think will play a strong flex support alongside of Chorong. I don't know how I feel about them, like I said, having just the one support. We did see Chorong play some flex support last year because Toronto also only had 2 supports, and so in double flex support metas, Chorong did have to play double flex. I don't remember what he played exactly, if he was the Ana or the Zen. I think he would have been the Zen because Twilight's like an unreal Ana player. I don't remember exactly, or if he played BAP. It is escaping me, but I do know he did play flex support last year. So he, similar to kind of the way we saw Vindime play it, Chorong also played it, and Toronto is a relatively successful team, so I think he can play it, but I would like to see them have another flex support player, just in case there's a really strong double flex meta. I don't know if I want to see Chorong be purely a flex support in any meta, but that's always just me kind of also being a little nervous for every team, and I always kind of want to say you should have as many contingencies in place as possible, but that's just me. All in all, though, very good duo, and I think that they're going to be just fine this season. I honestly think they're probably the strongest part of this roster. In my opinion, they are the 2 players that I'm the least concerned about. But I also, like I said, always like to see that extra flexibility, just have that fail-safe just in case you need it down the stretch. Finally, with the DPS for this team, Checkmate returning from last year, the primary flex DPS player for this team. So the Genji was one of his big roles. He also was a pretty good tracer as well. Genji was very meta last year, so he played a lot of Genji during those metas. So that's kind of what I think of him as. But he played a bunch of other stuff as well. He was the Reaper in the playoffs, stuff like that. And alongside of him, they bring in Merit. Now, Merit is coming in to replace Hydron. Relatively speaking, I think they're pretty similar, especially on Sojourn. I thought Merit and Hydron were 2 of the best Sojourns last year that weren't getting the proper attention. Proper was really, really good on Sojourn. But to me, Merit and Hydron were probably top 4 Sojourns in the league. Top 5 minimum, at least in the Western region. They were really, really good on the hero. I thought Merit was arguably the best Sojourn in the league. And Hydron was the most underrated Sojourn in the league for a while. I think by the end of the year, a lot of people kind of agree that Hydron was a very, very good Sojourn. So at least on the Sojourn, you're not losing anything by getting Merit. I also think Merit in general had a very good year last year. I think he's a phenomenal hit scan player who can play a lot of things. But Sojourn probably will have a lot of playtime. She's been meta for a while now. Just historically, Cassidy's pretty good right now too, and Merit's a pretty solid Cassidy as well. So I think he's a good player. I think he's a really solid addition here. With Checkmate, obviously they didn't play with each other a year ago. And I don't think they've played together on any team at any point in their history, but I do think they'll be fine. I think Checkmate looked good on that flex role, and I think that Merit is another good player. Just kind of keep with him as kind of his duo. I think that's one of the duos I feel pretty good about in that regard. And they round out their roster with Sauna, who to me is the most interesting signing for this team, because he is pretty well and truly a flex DPS player. He plays stuff like Tracer, like Genji. He also, though, in the Run It Back tournament, was the main Sojourn for Young and Beautiful, which is where he played. So he's a pretty flexible player. He can play a number of things. So I think that's a good sign for Sauna. I'm not super familiar with his play. I didn't watch the tournament. I did kind of go through and skim through some of the VODs just to kind of see some of his play here and there. And, I thought he looked good. And I know that he was a signing that Albert was very, very excited about with this team. So I think he's an interesting player to add to this team. I think the thing that I look at with this team, and Sauna and RuPaul really are the two parts where I look at this. This is a roster that's predominantly Korean. You have Sauna, who's Finnish. You have RuPaul, who's American and Bangladeshi. So it's a very interesting roster, to say the least. It's a lot of very good pieces, though in some ways I think this is kind of an odd roster. I was kind of a hater of the Mayhem last year, mainly just stylistically. I did not really like their playstyle. I thought they were pretty sloppy. I haven't really been a fan of the Mayhem in general for a long time. They've never really been a team that I found very exciting. They've always had exciting players. You go back to 2018, Saya player was incredible. He was that level of player. 2020, they started to kind of clean things up towards the end of the year. Fate was very, very good. Then, of course, you had Yaki come in, and Yaki was really, really good for 2 years. And last year, you had Hydron. So they've always had one player minimum who is just incredible, who you just watch, and you're like, this guy is unbelievably good to watch. And so in that way, I think that's going to be Merit this year. I think someone was similar to that last year as well. Just someone who you watched, and you were just, the way that he played was so good, right? So I think this team has a lot of talent on it. I don't really like when teams go with like a 4 players that speak one language, 1 player that speaks another language type of thing. Because at the end of the day, and Yiska's interview with Hawk, there was a thing where Hawk kind of mentioned, like, as the season goes on, the communication's not going to get worse. It can only get better. But I will always argue that one of the things, if you're a team that has to spend the beginning part of your year getting over language barriers, that's less time that you're spending kind of getting just overall kind of like perfecting your chemistry, because there's way more roadblocks that get into that, right? And some of these players have history on mixed rosters, right? Checkmate and someone were both on this team last year, so they spoke in mixed rosters. Sauna is from EU. Everybody in EU basically speaks English if they're on a mixed roster. The only one who hasn't played in a mixed roster before is Chorong, right? At least to my knowledge. He did in the Overwatch League, and I don't think he did in Contenders, because he was playing Contenders Korea. So usually you're not playing a mixed roster in Contenders Korea. And so I think on paper, if you just kind of look at what they have at their disposal, I really like this Mayhem roster. I think they have some talent. I don't think they have the highest end talent across the board. I do really like Chorong. I do really like Merit. I think those 2 additions in particular are phenomenal. And those are 2 players that I really like to see them pursuing and adding to this roster, because I think they really do kind of elevate this team in a way that's very, very strong and very, very good. But with the way this team is, and just to me, the way they played last year, I have concern about this team because as much as I think Gunba is a very, very good coach, I rate Gunba super highly, and I think that he did a phenomenal job coaching this team last year. I like McGravy, an assistant coach. I think this is one of those teams that has a really solid organization and just foundation. I think they're a very good community in terms of what they do for their team, and then also just like the Florida community in general. I'm very familiar with the Florida community. I think they do a really good job kind of bringing that all together and bridging that kind of language barrier. And I think that's always been their kind of goal, right? And Ye is very, very big on the idea of he wants to sign the best players regardless of what the language they speak, right? He wants the best roster possible, and he will do what he needs to do that. But I always think it's a potential problem. And I always think it is one of those underlying issues that if you give me two teams that are similar in skill, and one of them doesn't have language barrier issues, I'm almost always going to take that team. Because I just feel like, generally speaking, the history of the league, we've seen that is what works better. So, as good as I think this team can be, I have hesitation to think they're going to be really, really good. I think they look on paper better than they did last year, if only because Chorong, I think, is a better pick in the support line. And we didn't see a ton of XE last year. So, to me, like, Merit to Hydron is pretty much a horizontal move, but I think Sauna's flexibility gives you more than what you had with XE, and I think that opens up this team's ability quite a bit more. So I think they'll be better than they were last year. I don't know if I would say they did enough to improve to put themselves above a team like Boston, who have done a lot to get way better, right? I think Atlanta is probably still a better team than them. I think London and Florida are very close together. Florida was a bit behind London last year. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the same case this year. Florida was a little bit ahead of Toronto last year. I don't necessarily know if they'll be better than Toronto this year. So, to me, they kind of moved horizontally, partially because I think just the competition in general got better. So this is an interesting team to me. I'm curious to see what they do. I feel like the language barrier issue is one that I think a lot of people talk about. And it's not necessarily as big of a deal as a lot of people make it out to be. I've watched some interviews recently where a lot of time people say, like, yeah, you don't really communicate with each other, but you just figure out how to play with each other in game regardless of language barrier and issues. And so as time goes on, the teams just get better. And I thought Florida got better as the year went on last year. I thought that clearly you could see that they started to know how each other plays better, and they started to figure each other kind of out better as a team. And so I imagine the same type of thing's going to happen this year, and I think this team will probably be stronger in the second half than they were in the first half. But I do have my hesitation with this team. I hesitate to put them any higher than kind of like a C, low B, high C tier team. That's just really where I put this team. There's a lot of talent in the Western region, and I don't necessarily think Florida made the biggest splash across the board to really change my overall feelings about them in terms of how they did last year. But I definitely think that they made some positive moves and that they're moving in the right direction, and I'm intrigued to see how this team performs when the season kicks off. But that's really it for me for today. Those are my thoughts on this Mayhem roster. Let me know in the comments down below your thoughts on this roster. If you think they should make any additional moves to bolster this roster in any way, what role, what players, let me know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video and want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing, as your support on the channel does help out a bunch. Another set of these roster breakdown videos next week, and we'll be kicking off on Monday with the Toronto Defiant. So if you are excited for that and want to know when that comes out, make sure you subscribe so you can see it when it hits your subscription box on Monday. But that is going to be all for me for today. Thank you all once again. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.